and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Last week you met Lieutenant General P.K. Carlton and heard the incredible story of how what he hoped was going to be a career as an Air Force pilot became instead a career of perhaps even grander service as a medical surgeon who helped create and implement a vision for landmark breakthroughs in the care and survival of military men and women who have in the past, are now, and will certainly in the future put themselves in harm's way in defense of our country. We will continue today to hear those stories. But for most of this 30 minutes, General Carlton will talk about three Navy men, Craig Powell, Dave Tarantino, and Dave Thomas, and about a span of 19 minutes when their four paths met at the spot that terrorists flew American Flight 77 into the Pentagon, 11 September 2001. Please welcome back to Veterans of the Valley, Lieutenant General P.K. Carlton, who since 2002 has served as Director of Homeland Security for the Texas A&M Health Science Center. General Carlton, welcome back. It was a fascinating visit that we had last week, and I want to pick up sort of where we left off. You've been a medical doctor most of your career. After a failed flight physical, said that you could not be a pilot back when you were at the Air Force Academy, and you decided to become a doctor, and that's where your path has taken you. Talk about in 1999 when you became the 17th Surgeon General of the United States Air Force. How did your path get there, and what was your job in Washington at Bolling Air Force Base, which is right across the street from the Pentagon?
Yes, the Surgeon General of the Air Force is the chief doc for the Air Force, is the way to think about it.
Right.
Is in charge of organizing and training and equipping. And so as we look at how the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, each of us does it a little bit differently, but basically the same, it's how do we present our forces. My forces, indeed, were the medical forces that then would support the line of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and my particular part of the air was air evacuation.
Right.
And so that was my job. It also involved how do we do peacetime health care, how do we balance a budget, how do we interact with the Congress, a whole variety of other things, but it was to look around the corners for what's coming in the future, how can we prepare for them, and then to execute the medical program for 79 different facilities, which we had throughout the United States and overseas at that time.
Right. You told me one time when we were visiting that back in the 90s there were people that were saying, hey, you know, we're not going to need this, we're not going to go to war again. And then in
yes.
2001, 2002, that all changed, of course. In February of 2001, we're talking now, you were, I want you to talk about a discussion that you were having with a colleague in the Pentagon. And the discussion came to mind, and this goes back to what we were talking about last week about how you describe your job as looking around corners, conceiving of the inconceivable, and sort of how that relates to just sort of the happenstance conversation and how it came about one day in February of 2001.
Well, I was walking from one place to another, and the clinic commander for the Pentagon Clinic came up to me and said, we've got to do an exercise. And he started to describe what his plans were, and then he had to be quiet because we had an airplane go overhead, and we couldn't hear each other. And he looked at me and said, well, why don't we just do an airplane hits the Pentagon, loses an engine on takeoff from Ronald Reagan, the North Airport, takes a bunch of birds, it's not a far out scenario, and crashes with a minimal controllable airspeed into the Pentagon, medics, you're up. I said, I'll buy, please do. Mm-hmm. And so that exercise we accomplished in May. We did it as a tabletop, we have pictures of it. The airplane came to rest in the center courtyard, and we learned a number of lessons. We number one, didn't evacuate well. We didn't have a good evacuation plan. We didn't have evacuation plans for special needs people. We didn't have equipment, we didn't have training. We didn't have a variety of things that we needed for our medical teams that we thought we should need, and we decided that our get well date would be 1 September.
Right.
So when the event occurred on 11 September, I was in my boss's office, the Vice Chief of Staff, and went down to the clinic to pick up a medical team, thinking that the toughest place to be would be in the center courtyard because you couldn't get out. And as I grabbed a protective vest to put on, the young man beside me said, General, why are you making us do this again? Now, you don't normally get challenged by a two-striper at a 3-star level, but I responded to him and I said, well, I'm not making you do it again. Did you learn something last time? He said, yeah, I know how to handle this. I said, great, then stick like glue to me, because this is the real thing. Take a deep breath. That's real smoke. This is for real. And in fact, that young man put me out when I caught on fire.
I want to back up just a second. You arrived to work that day. I guess you figured it'd be a normal day of work. You had your list of things to do, what you were going to accomplish that day. And I think you said that you were in a meeting of some sort at the time when somebody turned on the television. And you said that immediately you knew where most of the country, most of the media, when the first plane hit the first tower in New York, that the people in that room knew that that was not a Cessna that had accidentally hit the World Trade Center. You knew more than that.
Yes, in that room, which was the Chief of Staff, the Vice Chief, all of the senior Air Force people in the Washington, D.C. area, it was very obvious that was no accident. That was not a navigational error.
Yes.
And that we had a real problem. They did not interrupt the meeting immediately, but instead waited a couple of minutes. And so literally we watched that one, the first impact, and then real footage came through that showed the second impact on the second tower.
Exactly.
And so at that point, our boss said, gentlemen, we're at war. And it was very apparent that we had a problem.
Right, indeed. You were on the other side of the Pentagon.
Yes.
From the impact area, but you knew immediately because you said that you could feel the vibration, you could feel the shudder, you could hear the noise, and the smoke was coming through the air conditioning system.
Yes, on the opposite side of the Pentagon, more than a half a mile away, the Pentagon shook from the impact, and the smoke spread immediately, and so we knew we had a problem.
Right. Take it from there. You went to the center of the courtyard with the team. Reported to the fire chief, I'm ready to accept casualties, because that's your job. You're in charge of medicine for the Air Force. Take it from there. You gathered 4 guys together, they got litters, and you headed to where?
Yes, well, the job and who's in charge becomes extremely important, and fire is always in charge.
Right.
Because they have the best situational awareness of what's going on in any given activity. So I reported into the fire chief and said, I'm ready to receive casualties. How can I help you? And just as this fire chief started to explain to me, he didn't know where they were. A young tech sergeant came out of the door standing next to the fire chief and said, you want to see where the dying is? Come with me. We can maybe save some. So I grabbed the 4 people closest to me, volunteered them to get a litter, and took a litter team then down the 4 corridor. And the Pentagon is a complex structure, 5 individual buildings, each of a shape of a pentagon, a 5-sided building.
5 rings.
5 rings, connected by corridors 1 through 12. So we went down the 4 corridor, which happened to be—
And the rings are A, B, C, D, and E, because you're going to be saying some letters here in a moment.
Yes.
And I want people to, most people have seen the aerial view of the Pentagon. They know what it looks like.
Yes.
But it's 5 rings from the inside out, A, B, C, D, and E.
That is correct.
Go ahead.
A is the center, and E is the outer, or the view lots, if you will. So we headed down the 4 corridor, went through A, B, C, and when we penetrated the D circle, or the D ring, it was on fire. The airplane had impacted between 4 and 5 corridors, and so we could not proceed on into the D ring, came out of D, and there was an alleyway there called the AE corridor, came into that area. And as soon as we could see, the first thing I saw was a woman that was airborne that had jumped off one of the upper stories. Turned out it was the 5th story, trying to get away from the fire. The fire is a terrifying thing. Yes. And this huge man caught her. And when he caught her, and understand and this woman was probably a slight woman, 110, 120 pounds, still knocked him right on his keister. He was flat. But as he's laying on his back, another woman jumps out the same window. And he had the presence of mind to turn turtle and hit her just as hard as he could as she went by, which gave her a horizontal vector instead of a vertical vector. Unfortunately, it also gave him a face plant. So he impacted his face on the concrete sidewall that was there, popped right up, came to me and said, "Sir, am I glad you're here?" Saluted and reported in. And I thought, oh man, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
This man had no uniform on. He was not officially clocked in even at that time. I guess he went into wherever their lockers are to put on his uniform because he was in shorts and a tank top, right?
He was in shorts and a tank top. He was very obviously a physical specimen, even with a bloody face, very obviously a physical specimen. Turned out he was a Navy SEAL.
Navy SEAL Craig Powell.
Craig Powell.
Yes.
He reported in and said, "Sir, I heard screaming right in this area," and he pointed to a hole from which fire was coming out, and had a debris pile that went up to about 6 or 7 feet. And the fire came jetting out across to the opposite wall and then bounced up into the air. He said, "We've got to go in that hole. I think we can get some more survivors."
What was the size of the hole? Because as it turned out, as you found out later, that the hole was created by the landing gear.
Yes, the hole
Right.
was created by the landing gear, and actually the landing gear was on fire just beyond where he was standing.
Right.
And so we're standing in the shadow of the hole, and it's probably 12 by 12 feet. Couldn't quite reach the top.
Right.
Couldn't side to side reach either side.
Right. We're going to see a photograph of it in a moment, but I want you to describe
Yes.
it first.
As
Yeah.
he's describing this, I've heard people scream as recently as 5 minutes ago. 2 other people came from the adjacent corridor, the 5 corridor, and burrowed right through the debris pile into that hole. Well, at that point, there's not a question of there are live people, and we just saw 2 go in. So we formed a line to follow in behind them and pass the debris that they were passing out at that time so that we could gain entrance into this. As it turns out, it's the Navy Comm Center, the
Right.
communication center.
Right. That's
Immediately inside, we were very fortunate to find 2 women that had collapsed from smoke inhalation, and when we picked them up, they were all attached, and so we passed them out. It was a rather surreal experience. As I'm passing this woman out, and understand, you can't stand up, you can't crawl because there's fire all around, so you're kind of in a hard squat as low as you can be, because the lower you are means you can breathe. And this woman revived literally as I'm maybe 2 inches from her, and probably I scared her to death. But these 2 women, we were very fortunate. They had gone down fairly recently. And so just the hassle of passing them out revived them.
Right.
It became very apparent to me that this was a very hostile place. The man in front of me went down from smoke inhalation. We passed him out. I went deeper into the building and found out that you just couldn't breathe at all. Came back out and said, "I want you to strip. I need your t-shirt, your t-shirt, your t-shirt, soak them." And we then had wet t-shirts to breathe through. That really was my contribution in this discussion. Passed those to the team members that were inside, and then I caught a glimpse of a gentleman with just his face. And remember, you can't see very well, but the fire is a remarkable brightness, and I saw him under 3 waterfalls. There was a waterfall of fire coming from the roof onto a bookcase, then it ran down the bookcase, then waterfalled onto a table, and he was immediately under the table, and then it went down the table and waterfalled off the end of the table. And so it was a very surreal experience, but all I could see was a face, and I didn't know if he was connected to a body or not. So I hit him with a wet t-shirt. He shook. About the time that the man in front of me tried to lift the table, could not. He pushed the fire out of the way, got on his back, did a leg press, and said, "Go get him."
Right.
And so it was apparent at that time that Jerry Hinson, who was a retired naval officer, was alive.
Civilian at the time. And the man that was
Yes.
doing the leg lift is David Tarantino.
Dave
who we
Tarantino
referred
happened to be a Navy physician.
Right, right. And he was along with Dave Thomas.
Yes, those were the 2 that had penetrated the
Exactly.
debris pile. Dave Tarantino gave me about 4 inches to get at this man. I got at him, invited him in my most polite military voice to come my way, and he did about 6, 8 inches, enough for me to get a hand on him, and then I could pull him out, and we passed him out. Then I got under the table with my colleague that had done the leg press. The most concerning thing I had at that point was this table's going to collapse and catch my friend, and so I wedged a fire extinguisher under the table. He relaxed and the table didn't come down. I got under the table with him, and he said, "There's more to the right, and let's see if we can still hear them." So we tried to get everybody quiet. The noise level was increasing for reasons that we didn't understand. So we told everybody to be quiet. The noise level didn't go down, but as this is going on, people are passing me things. They've passed me a fire extinguisher, they've passed me a flashlight, they've passed me a mask so that we could begin to breathe again. So I give those to Tarantino, and both of us then are trying to figure out how to put our mask on when we can't see. But in the very low levels, with a flashlight, with a fire extinguisher, and with a mask, we have the potential to see, to breathe, and then to take effective action with the fire extinguishers. So we thought we were king of the hill. We told everybody to be quiet, and in fact, the noise got louder, which we didn't understand. And then I heard a voice that said, "Get out." And I left a man in charge, the man in shorts that I had described to you.
Craig Powell.
Craig Powell. I left him in charge outside, told him to stay outside because he didn't have clothing in to go into a burning building. And unbeknownst to me, he had come in and evacuated our team that was to the left, looking for more survivors, and then came back in again because he was uncertain about why the noise level was increasing. Mm-hmm. He thought the building was collapsing, so he came to get us. And so as he came into the building, into the room with us, he felt with his hands to see what's overhead. We were in a wire enclosure. The ultimate in security is then a room within a room that is a solid wire enclosure. As he reached up to feel that, it wasn't hot as he described it, but the ceiling started to fall down. He could feel the impact. He then hit the Big John pose and told us to get out. Now,
in a louder voice.
Well, the first one was not very loud. The second one was very loud, very imperative. And I heard him very clearly, and it was a different octave level. It was a different urgency.
Yes.
And so I thought, I don't know what's going on, but I know I left somebody in charge. Now they're telling me to get out. They know something I don't know. And so I grabbed Tarantino and said, "We're out of here," pushed him towards the direction we'd come, the hole. And then I followed him down that little rabbit path towards the hole. And all of a sudden, the guy behind me hit me hard. I hit Tarantino hard, and we all ended up in a ball in a lake, if you will, the water that had accumulated in the AE corridor. Right. It turns out that was the pressure wave from the building collapsing that focused then at the hole.
And blew you all out.
Blew us all out at the same time.
Yeah. Because you described that you, getting out on your own, you couldn't walk, you couldn't crawl, you were literally churning, like you were trying to swim through the debris to get out. So
yes.
you needed help, and that push of air put you all out.
Yes.
Yeah, and like you said, Powell, who you referred to as Big John, and I think that's good. You were concerned that you had lost your team, your original team of those 4 who had brought the litters,
yes.
who had gone off to the left while you had gone straight in, but as it turns out, he had gone in and gotten them.
Yes.
Right.
And again, in any major event, you see your part of the world and you have some idea of what happened from your memory. But only when we got everybody together about 2 weeks later did we really find out who was on first, who was on second, found out that what had gone on.
Matter of fact, the second lady that he caught recovered. I found out through my research. Her name was Dr. Betty Maxwell, who was worked there at the Pentagon. We've got pictures, and let's go to them right now. And this is the hole that we talked about that was created by the landing gear. And everything that you just talked about, that was it.
Yes. Now picture this. This is 3 days later.
Right. Picture
this. There's a jet of straight fire that comes off the top 3 feet and hits the opposite wall. It's so strong. And there's about, at higher than eye level, a debris pile right across this. The debris pile is also on fire. So it was truly a vision of hell, if you will.
Let's move on. These are pictures that I guess a lot of people have seen over the last 8 years, but just a reminder of the destruction.
And again, just to remind people, this is the section of the Pentagon that had just been renovated.
Right.
That included structural steel and water.
And it had rebar, it had water, where the Pentagon was not built that way.
Yes.
And as you had told me, as a matter of fact, that it actually hadn't been completed yet. And normally, if it had been completed, there would have been 5,000 people there.
That's
in
correct.
that area. As it turned out, there were only a couple of hundred there. Lost 125 of them. But if there was any silver lining there, is that there's not as many people that could have been there at the time.
That's correct.
Right. Let's move on. This is an animation. Talk about what we're looking at there.
What you're seeing is an animation of the Boeing 757 as it comes across, just about to hit the building. He has hit several light poles, one of which set his right engine on fire. This shows you the diagrammatic picture. He's in a little bit of a left-hand bank. By speed criteria, he's going 460 knots at this particular point. And so this gives you a God's eye view to think about then the next picture, which is an actual photograph of the impact sequence.
Right.
On the right, what you see approaching aircraft is actually the smoke tail. You can see the nose of the aircraft just in front of that meter that is a parking meter, and you can see the tail just to the right and above the smoke line.
Right.
Now, 1 second later, you have the impact, and you can see the airplane literally disintegrating as it penetrates the building and as it literally explodes.
This is from a security camera. And people have seen these pictures before, but seeing them again, it's quite
Yes.
amazing.
It's amazing. And pieces of the airplane were strewn all over the Pentagon grounds.
Right.
Now, this shows you in red the major damage and in blue the minor damage. You can see it reflects the airplane exactly. Now, if you'll notice, the airplane is in a little bit of a left-hand bank. It follows the outline of the airplane exactly, and in a subsequent airplane or picture, we will show you a perfectly circled hole.
Right, there it is right there.
That is the right engine.
Yeah. If you look, there's 4 arrows at the bottom of this picture. The far right arrow is sort of pointing up towards what you can see is an imprint of the exact hole, which is the size and the shape of a jet engine. And that is where the right jet engine impacted into the building. You can see that, that circular impact. Incredible. This is after the collapse. Aerial view of the collapse of the Pentagon. These are the people that we spoke about. On the left is Navy Officer David Tarantino. On the right is David Thomas, and Mr. Henson, the man that the 3 of you helped save, is in the middle.
Yes, these became very good friends. Dave Tarantino remains an active duty physician. I put him in for the Medal of Honor from the American Medical Association, and he was awarded that about a year later.
Right.
David Thomas has now been promoted to Rear Admiral and is the commander in Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
And Jerry Henson actually spent 2 days in the hospital but had no major injuries.
Incredible.
Incredible, absolutely incredible.
Absolutely incredible. What you're describing took about 19 minutes, and as I wrote on my notes here, your day wasn't over. This is still a working day for you.
Yes.
Your job was what you prepared for all your career was times like this, to anticipate the unimaginable. So you still had work to do. So one thing I thought is that your staff, who had been kicked out of the Pentagon because of the security, was actually at your home. Is that right?
Yes.
When you showed up at your home, they thought you were dead because you were reported 4 hours missing, and your executive had reported that he had dropped you off to take an identification picture right at the point where the impact happened earlier in the morning at 9:30. And but luckily the picture was taken early and you were out of there by then.
Yes.
But your staff thought you were dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
It actually was a little bit funny. The staff's all there, and I came upstairs. I was a mess, and you certainly don't give a briefing to your boss when you're a mess. So my desire was to get in a fresh uniform. And all I saw was a bunch of jaws drop and people's faces turn white. And I made a joke. Hey, come on, what do you guys think? You bump off the 3-star, everybody gets a promotion? Come on, we got work to do. and in fact, I didn't realize that they'd been told that. Unfortunately, they hadn't told my wife. So she wasn't so alarmed, gave me a kiss at the door and said, go get cleaned up.
You found out that you all were, your duty as far as for immediate response was not needed in Washington, that the Washington hospitals had it under control, so your attention went to New York City. And it was decided, we've only got about 3 minutes left, unfortunately, but to launch a 400 beds of medical and surgical capability to New York City, and you had that done in 22 hours because you did not know at the time what was going to happen in New York and how many injuries that there would be in New York. But it became actually what turned out to be a great exercise. It wasn't needed once you got to New York because, unfortunately, the buildings collapsed. There were deaths instead of injuries, and New York had it under control. Am I pretty much describing that?
That is correct. Yes, exactly.
Right.
So we responded to New York City. We briefed our bosses. We are the Air Force, and so Air assets are readily available, and we were the lightest assets to respond. We had tried to contact New York City to find out did they need help, and I had been working with both Washington Hospital Center and New York City on mass casualties and how do you plan for them. And so not being able to get a hold of them concerned me, and so we launched our fleet, and in less than 24 hours we had those 400 beds of medical and surgical capability at an air base right outside New York City called McGuire Air Force Base. As it turns out, we weren't needed. We came back, but only for a short time because those same people deployed immediately in support of the ongoing war then that occurred in Afghanistan.
In a minute and a half, can you describe your job as Director of Homeland Security at the Health Science Center?
Yes, I am very privileged to work for Dr. Nancy Dickey. She has asked me to do the same thing I did in the military, and that is look around corners and figure out how can we prepare our state better, how can we prepare our nation better, what are the ongoing issues in combat casualty care that I was involved with for so long, and that's really what I do here. The highlight of that was 2005 when we had an opportunity to stand up a contingency hospital in our large animal hospital. Mm-hmm. And we took care of 650 people that had been evacuated for Hurricane Rita. And so the same things that I've worked on throughout my whole career now apply to us today as we work a whole variety of different issues, both at the state and at the national level. So that's what she's asked me to do, that's what I've continued to do, and I absolutely love it.
And you've been here since 2002. You came here right about a month before you officially retired from the United States Air Force.
That's correct.
It's been an incredible 2 episodes, and we thank you for your service and thank you for just an incredible story and what you continue to do for our country and our university.
Well, thank you. It's a real privilege.
All right. Thank you, General. Over the last 2 Veterans of the Valleys, we've tried to capture the essence of this fascinating career of Lieutenant General P.K. Carlton. In fact, it would take many, many hours to tell the whole story. General Carlton and his wife Jan have 4 grown children. We thank him and salute him for his service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.